you'd be able to see each other.
Yes.
Yeah, no, my kid's skiing,
Exactly.
skiing with the ski team today. I'm sure she's having a great time.
That's awesome.
Hey, Ryan.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, just yeah. Hey. Rob's going to be here to talk with the non-athletic.
Would you like me to? I'm prepared to.
I left my notes on my computer. I didn't print them out because my printer's broken.
Totally fine.
Thank you.
I'm
man.
happy to
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, right, exactly.
I'm prepared to do it. So if you want to, well, I'm
better than
prepared
week or so.
as I can be. So I'm happy to do it.
Okay, so if you're going to be more specific from memory, I can.
Yes.
Good, how are you?
I'm happy to do it. If you want to chime in, go for it.
Pretty good. Get these back.
Unless you want to do it. Do you want to do it?
No, I prefer not.
Joe.
Okay. Okay.
How was that second dose?
It was 12 brutal, not brutal, I mean, it was 12 like rough, feverish, achy hours. So I got it at 9:30 and I started around 10 to feel like, oh yeah, this is going to be what I've been hearing it's going to be. And then it was like chills. I took a Tylenol at that point because they say not to pre-medicate, so I took a Tylenol and Zofran just in case at that point. And then I woke up, like fell asleep at 10, woke up at like 1:30 or 2 with like, it was less like hit by a bus, I was saying, and more like I had just run a marathon. Like I was like, Ross, you gotta get up and like lay, I needed like pressure on my legs, like deep ache and like muscle aches.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
That's
Like super muscle aches and like chills, and then like when I would get up to go to the bathroom, it would be that like kind of dizzy, like yucky, but it wasn't terrible.
Thank you all for coming. We've had no one request an audience to comment on items not on the agenda. Since we're all here, we don't have to do the roll call, so we'll move into the report of the secretary. May I have a motion, please, to approve the minutes of our last regular meeting?
A motion to approve the minutes of the regular meeting of Wednesday, January 20th, 2021.
I second.
I didn't catch the source of the sound. Who seconded?
Yes, I second.
Jen and
Yes.
then Heather.
Heather, thank you. Thank you. Anybody have any comments, corrections? I found one thing that I wanted to point out, but I wonder if I'll be able to find it again. Yeah, it was in the report of the Facility and Finance Committee, and there was a sentence in which I reported that the spend on, where is it? Yes, adult education is net positive now on the same, and that should read glide slope, is what I think I said. And it says slide slope, which means I should speak more clearly when I speak. Anybody else have any other comments or corrections? Another sterling job. All in favor? That's 6-0. Thank you.
If anything came out of the executive session we had with Drummond, it was shortening those notes.
Yes.
That's huge.
good.
Yes.
That's such a change.
Yeah.
To be absolutely certain.
Yep.
The next item is the report of the chair. The only thing I have on there is that the next town official meeting is scheduled for February 10th at 9:30. And that will be a Zoom meeting, and the link to the Zoom meeting will be sent out in advance of the meeting for those of you interested in attending. Okay, and that brings us to the report of the superintendent, which is action-packed tonight.
Yeah, it is. Stuff cooking. Just to start off with, I wanted to share the budget, budget timeline. And so this is the workshop kind of order that we followed in the past, and just wanted to make sure that we were all on the same page. But the school budget is presented on March 3rd, typically, the first meeting in March. And then prior to our meetings, we hold budget workshops where the individual cost centers would present on their different budgets, and then that would give an opportunity for all of you to ask questions once the overall budget is presented. And so March 17th would be the high school, middle school athletics and the maintenance budgets. March 17th, there would also be a facilities and finance meeting. April 7th, again, it would be Elliott Central Great Works and Transportation. And then the 28th would be central office, special ed, technology, federal grants, and adult education budgets. What we try to do is if things go quickly on the 17th and on the 7th, Ryan and I can present on a couple of those items. So if we can put a couple of those items onto an additional night, that frees up the 28th in case there's a specific question that the board may have on that night. And so if we can open that up, that allows you to say, hey, look, we want to revisit this in the case that you want to do that. So we'll kind of be the fill-ins if things go quickly with some of the schools. Typically, they go fairly quickly because it's just a supply budget for them for the most part. And then on May 5th, that's an opportunity for where you'll present your budget and what you'll present to the community. May 12th is the district budget meeting. We have not had any information on what that will look like this year. I'm sure that will be forthcoming. And then the district budget validation referendum will be June 8th. Any questions? Make sense to everybody?
Thank you.
Okay. The next thing on the agenda is a draft, and this is, when I say draft, it's really a draft. It's just really kind of taking the calendar for next year and rolling it forward. And just want to remind people of the process. So what we'll do is, I'll share this with you this evening. We'll then work with the SRTC. And so really, that's a big driving factor for us. So by state law, we can only have 5 out-of-sync days amongst the 7 sending schools. And so what Wells is doing, what Stanford's doing does affect us. And so we take that information and try to plug in what works for us as well. All of our contracts are slightly different. So for instance, I believe it's York has built into their negotiated agreement that the Friday before April vacation is an off day for teachers. And so that's something that we have to take into account when schedules are being built. So we just need to be mindful of that. So we'll go through, correlate with what they're doing with the SRTC, and then once we create our draft, we then give it to the QEA to have the QEA review that and get their feedback, and then once they've looked at that, put their eyes on it, we'll bring it to the board for the board's approval. So remember, 175 student days. We do have some professional development opportunities built into the year. One of the things that we have to balance with this calendar is that this year our plan was to do ALICE training, which is our safety protocols in the event of school violence. Obviously, in the midst of the pandemic, we could not do that. And so that's one of the things that we're going to have to look at when we build the schedule this year is how do we build that time in early in the year to get all of our staff trained in order to get our students trained. Just an important thing. And then the other part that always is tricky is senior days and graduation. So we have to be really careful that we don't leave ourselves too short where we have to move graduation. And so we've got to be able to find a way to make that work. Ideally, we could have graduation on the 10th and then have the last day of school on the 13th. That solves a lot of problems for us, but I'm not sure if we can make that work with all the other considerations. So we'll have to go through the calendar and look at that. So, any questions? There is some language in the contract that says we could only start X number of days before Labor Day.
Okay.
And so that's something that we work out with the QEA, but that is part of the language in the negotiated agreement. So, but this is really just a beginning conversation. But
February break looks really late.
Say
Maybe
again?
it's just the way that it fell, but February break seems like it's a week later.
Yeah.
almost.
absolutely, I want to double check that because that does look odd.
Does not look odd? Yeah.
Yep. Yep. That's why it's a draft. So we'll make sure make sure we get that day right before we do anything.
I'm just frankly giddy at the prospect of a possible normal-looking school year.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
no kidding.
And so that's the question that we're getting a lot right now is
Yeah.
that, what does next year look like? And so
Yep.
we're going to go ahead with that. We're planning to return to somewhat normalcy. I mean, I'm not sure what that looks like, from a budgetary perspective. We couldn't have done this year what we did without the support of the CRF and CARES money that came from the federal government. And so we have to plan for what we can do. With that being said, when I present the budget in 3 weeks, we really have to focus on that remediation of those students who may be off. The virtual dropout is something that we're monitoring very closely, measuring where kids are. I'm pretty optimistic right now with where we are with the elementary schools. Some really nice data is coming back, which is good to see. But at the same time, I think we need to look at it in a much, much bigger picture, and then also look at our summer programming for students. So, anything else? Teacher's contract is 181 days, just to remind everybody. So 175 student days, 181 teacher days.
And Lisa, you're right, on my calendar, President's Day is the 15th, on the Google calendar. So you're right, it's off a week.
I think so. It might be off, yeah.
President's Day is the 14th of February?
Yeah, it must be the 14th.
Yeah,
Yeah.
perfect.
Oh,
Next year it is the 21st?
Oh, right, I'm looking at
wow.
this year, you're right.
so it really is a week late. That's so weird.
That's crazy.
Super late.
Ryan is like my walking encyclopedia. So
Shouldn't have doubted. I don't even know how to get to 2022
I wonder if that means
on
that
here.
New Hampshire and Maine will end up having.
yeah, it'll be
something
interesting.
else
I want to double check that with what,
Crossing over,
yeah.
yeah.
but that's typically what it aligns with. And it looks different after this year because I guess this year was one of the few years that all 4 weeks line up perfectly. So next year doesn't. But,
Yeah.
okay. Just a quick COVID-19 update. We are considering continuing to plug along. We did receive notification that Marshall Middle School was considered an outbreak. That phone call really was about a week behind the cases. And so it's just interesting how things have evolved. So early in the process, we really got that outbreak status notification when we were really being recommended to close for 14 days or go remote for 14 days within hours, and so now that time frame is a little bit more. And it is lagging behind. There is the reality that we can stay in outbreak status if we have one positive case every 13 days in the building because that clock resets. And so I made a phone call, and this will tie in a little bit to the conversation that Rob and Rich are going to share with us this evening. But just to say, hey, look, where is Marshwood? From a CDC perspective, Erica, what does Marshwood look like right now? And I think she was fairly positive. She felt like there was nothing, no major red flags that she was seeing when looking at our data. And that's something that she reviews on a regular basis. And so that's good news. Obviously, we're bouncing it every day, and the numbers across the state seem to be dropping right now, which is really encouraging news. We just hope it stays that way. This February vacation coming up is one of those times where you kind of hold your breath a little bit to see, how that's going to be managed, because we have seen, obviously over breaks, those numbers pick up a little bit more when people tend to get together a little bit more often. So. But that's kind of where we are right now as a district. I think we have had a couple of classes that have had to go out, due to the close contacts. But it's typical for the way we're managing things. So
There's a football game this Sunday that tends to draw
Yeah,
people together
that-
too.
Yeah.
It's been suggested.
yeah, that will be. So that being said, I think that, I'm encouraged to see what we're seeing. It was encouraging to see that Cumberland County went from the yellow to the green. With the state assessment system, that was positive. Hoping that trend continues for York County as well. That would be wonderful. But this is where we're at.
Sure.
Okay.
Good, thank you.
Just a kind of a little, just a sad sharing. And Lisa, you may have had Mr. Pelham as a teacher.
I sure did, and in fact, he and my grandparents, my grandfather having been on the school board, they were very good friends.
Yeah.
Yeah, they live in,
So those of you who aren't aware, as you walk into Elliott Elementary School, the gym actually has a nice plaque in his honor, and the gym being named. And so the school is working on some things right now to be able to honor him. And Peter and Ann Schlissel are really working on that right now, which is wonderful. But he was just a fixture. Even as recent as last year, coming into classrooms and talking about World War II, and Mike Samaraki did a ton of things with him. He had a ton of different roles here. His daughter was a guidance counselor here for a lot of years. His grandchildren attended school here, but so really just a fixture in the Marshwood community. And you would see him every Elliott Festival Day sitting on his front lawn, which is directly across from Elliott Elementary School, as the parade went by and being actively involved. So just a wonderful, wonderful man, and we were very fortunate to have him. And just wanted to make note of that. Obviously, one of the things that you don't think about is how the gym is named for him, which is a big thing. So just wanted to share that with all of you.
Thank you.
The next thing is we have asked Mr. Basel and Mr. Scully to talk a little bit about kind of where we are with our activities right now. And so there's a little bit, I want to say this the right way. The athletics piece got thrown on us at the last, so 2 weeks ago. That's when we got the notification from the MPA that, hey, the rules have changed, which really caused a series of events. And so if you look at things in isolation, it seemed like a very manageable issue. But if you look at it from a 50,000-foot view, a lot of other questions start to be gathered. And so Rich has done a tremendous amount of work making sure that we were ready to go for the athletic piece. And then Rob has done a tremendous amount of work with Kelly and the rest of his administrative team of getting us in a good position to start on Monday with the in-person clubs and activities. I think for clarity though, the clubs and activities is a little bit different. Whereas with athletics, you know that you're gonna have practice Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, let's say at a set time. And that's fairly simple. Student council may not meet every day at the same time. Student council may meet at 7 o'clock in the evening, which we can't do. And so we need to create a schedule where we can monitor who's coming in, create the expectations for the staff as to what that looks like, the safety protocols that are in place. And so a lot of that's the work that we're doing. So Rob will talk a little bit about that. And we are trying to create kind of 3 levels of those activities that could continue to function within the remote world, and it really isn't a lost opportunity for kids. We want to make sure we recognize those. We want to recognize those activities that really require in-person to be able to get the true experience of the activity. And then there's going to be times when that first group, which could be remote, may need to get together, and we need to schedule that. So we need to create a schedule that has some flexibility to manage that. The other piece, which For me, is the most concerning part, short of the virus, is at the middle school and elementary school, there's a real equitability issue that we have to face. And so we don't have a late bus that's running right now. That's just something that we can't do with the way we have our busing right now. So at the high school, there's a high percentage of kids who have transportation and can get here. At the middle school, a lot of it is based on, whether your family, it has to work to be able to pick you up, to be able to drop you off. And so that's a whole nother round to this. And so we are trying to find ways to offer opportunities for kids in a way that everybody has an equal opportunity to take advantage of that. With that being said, Dr. Shaw came out last week and basically, I'm going to paraphrase, and if I get it wrong, please forgive me, but basically said, that the rewards of having kids interacting in person is really important. And so we have to find that balancing act. And so our elementary schools are working on that. Our plan with the elementary schools is that when we return from February vacation, that's when we're going to really dive into doing that. And so it is a little bit trickier. A lot of activities have already started. The other issue that, and just to be totally frank, I think the number of staff that are interested in doing these activities after school isn't what it used to be. I think that people are stressed, they're tired, it's another level of risk that they're taking, so I think there is some real concerns about doing things in person. And so I just want to be honest with you that's, because we have something on the books, A, the student interest still kind of drives what we do, and B, just being able to have people to be able to offer those programming. And so that is a tricky balance. But elementary schools, middle school, Great Works, Central and Elliott, we're talking about the Monday after vacation, we'll start that process. And that also includes, which is a whole nother layer to this, is after school help. So how do you keep your cohorts, because we do a really tight job of cohorting at the elementary schools and at the middle school. And so how do you keep your cohorts but still offer in-person help if people need that? Do you create another cohort to bring in an opportunity after school for kids? So these are the questions that we're trying to work through right now. And so, obviously we can do that. And so when the MPA kind of made this decision, on one hand it's, oh, sure, we can start practice, but you know that as you start to peel back that onion, more and more things are going to start to come out of that. So Rich and Rob will present. If there's any questions, certainly let me know. I will say one last thing. One of the things I think we've got to really consider is that do we play games when we're in outbreak status? And so that's 2 weeks ago I felt really strongly that we don't want to. I don't know how I feel right now, because the simple fact is that we could have one case in a 13-day period and not play games because of a metric that the CDC has created. So I called Erica Penrod myself on Monday and said, Erica, how does this work? Would you ever tell us that we shouldn't run athletics? I said, you're not going to want to have this question because I'm sure 1,000 people have asked you, but what do you think? And she said, we would never tell you that you shouldn't run athletics, you shouldn't run extracurricular activities, you shouldn't be in school. What we would say, though, is that, hey, this is what your numbers look like. You may want to consider changing what you're doing and kind of make a recommendation as opposed to an edict, I guess is the best way to say it. So with that being said, that's when she made the comment that she really felt like we were in a pretty good place right now as a district, and she doesn't see any red flags for us right now. So I just think that's important just to note, but that is, there is a little bit, there's some gray area right now that we're getting into. So just want to be mindful of that.
Yeah. There's a bit of a lag on her evaluation, of course. But
That's correct.
The good news is that it's trending downward right now, so.
That's correct.
It looks like it's improving.
Yes, and
Yeah.
then unfortunately we're going into a vacation, which you always like we're keep going in a good way, and so we'll see how it is, and again, just to be mindful to people that what Rich is going to talk about, what Rob's going to talk about, is we're creating, a class session really is what we're doing, and what a class may look like. And so, Dave Gratian and I were just having a conversation about, people playing instruments, in school during the day. What does that look like? Because there's some specific guidelines on that. So we've bought special masks, we've got covers for trumpets, there's a lot of things that we've done, but there's some details that we've got to work out. So it is not as simple as people like to think it is at times, and a lot of places have said we're not even going to go there right now. So we're just trying to find that middle ground of what makes the most sense, but also gives the kids the opportunities that they need. So, any questions before Rich and Rob? Okay, Mr. Basel.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here tonight. And before I get into my kind of the highlights on what's going on with the athletic world. I want to thank John for bringing up Mr. Pelham. You know, Bob Pelham was really a cherished member of our community, and he was one of the first guys I met 18 years ago when I first started working here, and I stayed up in touch with him, you know, going to visit him over at the Edgewood Center up until, you know, a few weeks ago, and he was as sharp as a tack, you know, and he really meant a lot to our community. And just a quick aside, in talking with his grandson Josh, you know, we're setting up a scholarship fund in the name of Bob that we're going through the family on, and they really wanted to support that. And Bob had a 78-game win streak as a basketball coach here at Marshwood, which, if you calculate 78 wins over a course of time, that's about 5 or 6 years straight. And you know, he coached Mike Zamarki's mother and some other people here in the community that still attend our games. But I thank you again, John, for bringing up Bob and his memory, because he was certainly a person that we're going to miss. So. And I think John, and getting into my spiel tonight, John handed out, I hope you got a MHS highlights for the board meeting on 2/3. I'm just going to quickly go through some of these things, and then, you know, we want to open it up for questions, kind of give you where we are. You know, close to 2 months ago, I came and gave you a presentation on what winter athletics could look like. And going into January, you know, with us being in yellow and not looking like we may come out for a little while, we were getting a little bit, I can speak probably for myself and for the kids and the coaches, we were getting pretty bummed out on where we were. But, you know, there was a reversal of fortune for us, and luckily, like John had mentioned, the cases are starting to go down. You know, we were in the yellow status back December 2nd, and we still are, but up until January 14th, when the DOE and DHHS, you know, made an announcement on one of the CDC reports that was live, and Jeannie Lambrew had said that they were going to let the MPA make the decisions on whether counties that were in yellow were going to be able to play or not. As you can imagine, that really set things off in motion for a lot of schools. All the York County schools were in yellow, the Cumberland County schools were in yellow. And you know, we got together and met quickly. You know, our phones were going off, and we were in meetings with John the very next day. You know, and the MPA came out on the 20th and actually made a statement saying if it's deemed safe to do so by the local administration, teams may begin practicing following the established sport-specific return to play guidelines. And as you know, I'd given you the pandemic playbook before, and we were ready to go. So we felt really good about what we had in place for our programs and our kids and keeping them safe and keeping our community safe. We sat down, again, with Mr. Cavalier and the high school administration, and we made the decision, along with the other schools that were in our conference, that we were going to begin play, as far as practicing goes, on the 25th. In really a way that we were going to walk before we were going to run, I guess is the best way to put it. And we were going to go slow, and we were going to try to mirror what we do in the classrooms. The superintendents in York and Cumberland County met, and you can see on here that I kind of listed off 8 areas that we were going to really closely follow to try to make sure that we were doing the right thing. Setting off competitions not starting until February 8th, so we had 2 full weeks to really get our feet underneath us, making sure that our protocols and our guidelines were working and they were in place before we stepped foot on the court or on the fields or anything, the mountains to the ice, to see another team. We were going to do no more than 2 competitions in any given week. We were also going to try to do the same school to compete against in that same week, and that created a little bit of problems because we were trying to keep the cohorts the same as much as we could, even though we were expanding out. But basically what we did, for example, with the basketball schedule, we're playing York boys and girls on a Tuesday night, opposite sites, and then we switch the sites and play on a Friday night, York boys and girls again. So we try to keep the same school in that given week. If the school's in district or remote learning, it was going to be up to a local decision whether we participated or not. Games, this is something that was set out by the governor anyway. Games are limited to players, coaches, and game personnel with no spectators or volunteers permitted. The good news is that we are going to stream events. We have a Huddle Focus camera, and it's probably better news than I presented earlier in the fall. With our Huddle Focus camera, this is going to be a free service. to people out there that will be able to live stream, so they don't have to pay for an event through the Huddle Focus. And if anybody else in our conference has the Huddle Focus camera, it will be free as well.
Cool.
If we play a school that is utilizing the NFHS camera, it's going to be an $8 fee. It's actually $8 or $7.95 a month. And you'd pay $4 or $5 probably to go see a game individually, so you're probably saving money that way. But you'll be able to see the games because people are going to be using one of the two. And some people are implementing Facebook Live as well. We are going to try to do that for our ice hockey events as well, if we get to play games over in New Hampshire. And I'll get into the ice hockey bit because it's a little bit of a complicated thing with ice hockey, and I'll give you a nutshell version of what we're going through right now. Superintendents and athletic directors have been keeping in close contact every week. I talk to John after every superintendent meeting that he has so that we're all on the same page, and we've been doing a good job communicating with each other, and masks are going to be required, and they have been required for all practices and any competitions that we may get into. As John said, we're trying to keep our cohort small, and given the spaces that we're working in, we're trying to mirror the PE classes as much as possible. And really, we've been limited to skills and drills, and it hasn't been defensive play, because we're not feeling we're in the outbreak status right now. We want to make sure that we're doing a good job in the skill and drill area. And I can tell you, just hearing back from the coaches, they were a little leery about just doing skills and drills for a couple weeks, but I've heard back from them saying it's actually been great, and they're having a lot of fun with the kids, and the kids are having fun, and they're creating some great environments. So that has been a great thing. Another thing that maybe some of you received, a letter went out to all the parents in the district, just informing them the decision, how we came to it, what we were going to try to do, the guidelines, and also providing them the pandemic playbook so they could feel good about what we were doing. The MPA also announced a wedge season, which I know we had talked about in the past and brought up, and it's something that has come to fruition. It's going to happen. It's going to happen February 22nd up until April 16th. It does present some complexities for us as well as other schools. In the wedge season, volleyball can be played, wrestling can happen if it comes out of the high-risk status that it's currently in with the DHHS, and unified basketball. We're currently working through a ton of things in that area to make sure that we can provide those things and make sure we do it safely, and that all the kids can participate in whether we want. We feel really good about that. There have been some questions that have come up within the leagues about offering, several schools have opted out of offering unified basketball because they feel that some of their kids are immunocompromised, and they are at higher risk, so they are choosing to do in-house activities. Tatiana Walterbeek is our advisor for that group and our coach, and she has had meetings and reached out to families and have kept them in the loop on when we're going to start and what we're going to be doing, and they all understand it's a pretty fluid situation for us now, as it has been since last March. So we're hopeful to get that season off the ground as well. The other thing that was a little bit of a it was understandable, but I would say it's a disappointment to a lot of people in our community and a disappointment to our kids that participated in that sport was football. Football was voted on by the MPA Football Committee January 28th to not have a season either in the spring or at the end of the spring season for various reasons. One of them being weather in the first part of the springtime season and not being able to play outdoors, and having a season in June and July presented a lot of problems for schools, and they did not want to compromise the spring season because the spring season was taken away completely from kids last year, so they did not want to impede on that. Some insurance questions came up for quite a few school districts, but I spoke with the MPA today, and there's some things in the works with outside groups that may help especially our senior football players out, where they'll be given an opportunity to play one last time. So it's probably going to become public in a month or so, but they're working behind the scenes to make sure that our kids get something in that area. And I know quite a few of our kids were were pretty disappointed about that because they were 3-time state champs and wanted to make it a 4th, so it really felt for the seniors. And again, still working through logistics with that wedge season, and you know, the wedge season does overlap into the spring. It will go to April 16th, so there's about a 3-week overlap between our current winter season, which will end on the 13th of March, and our spring season, which would begin on the 29th, and the wedge season ends on the 16th. So we're in the process of trying to you know, make sure that all our kids get a chance to participate in everything that we can.
Rich, what's compounded that, let me make sure I get this correct, though, is that typically for the vast majority of our winter athletes, the season would be ending next Friday. Typically, February 12th would be typically the end of the season, and so one of the things the NPA did is they gave the opportunity to extend the season. And so by extending the season, now we have kids who could be involved with 2 different teams at one time, and so now there's the kind of the bona fide team member rule, which is an NPA rule that we're trying to get some clarity on, and there's also just the idea, do we want students being involved with an additional cohort now? So you're doing, you know, one cohort, and then you're going to go do another cohort, and then there's a conversation about, is it healthy for a child to be involved in 2 of these activities and trying to balance being a student at the same time? So there's some conversations that we have to have. And they did the same thing in the springtime now, where that wedge season kind of bumps into the spring for a 3-week period, which again could affect whether a child wants to play you know, softball, track. You know, what could be tricky is if there was ever a tryout situation and a student couldn't be involved with that for the first 2 weeks, so they're playing volleyball, we would want to give them the opportunity. But so it does create another layer of things that we have to work through. So just to kind of give you a context as to why that wedge season is a little bit challenging.
Yeah. I would also say that when the wedge season came into play and we learned that there would be an overlap, you know, I did a questionnaire with the rest of our league out there, as well as some of the York County schools that are in the Western Maine Conference, and, you know, basically asked them the questions of, will your school offer the sports during the wedge season? Does your school have a policy in place restricting kids to playing one sport or activity? If you play volleyball or unified basketball, will you allow the kids to also play basketball, ski, or another winter sport that overlap? If a kid's playing volleyball or another wedge season sport, will they be allowed to participate in a spring activity? And is your school restricting play on outside teams such as AAU, travel teams, et cetera, if they are participating in a current sport? And we got answers all over the place, you know, because everybody's handling it different, and I got a lot of unsures on where they were because all the stuff is coming at us so quickly. So I can assure you this, though, like, we're going to do the best thing for our kids like we always do, and we'll try to offer as many opportunities and do it in the safest and manner, and it won't be a fly in the night decision that we make. So how about questions?
Thank you. This has been a crazy time. I feel like the ground is shifting under you faster than it is under most of the other operations.
It's been certainly interesting, I can tell you that. But it's been a strong support with John and Rob and Ryan. You know, everybody has been a real good team, and making sure that we just do the right thing for our kids and our people that are involved and keep everybody safe. And I'll tell you, the kids are happy being out there. The coaches are saying the smiles on the faces, and you know, I think people are just glad to be out and doing something and taking it seriously and trying to keep everybody else safe. So,
Thanks,
Excellent.
Rich.
Yes, thank you.
thanks.
Next, Rob is going to talk a little bit about the MHS activities and clubs.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for inviting me tonight. What I want to do is just give a little update, some context, and a little timeline in the work that we've been doing relative to what we're referring to as the non-sports extracurriculars. I was referring to them as the non-athletic, but then I thought I didn't want to slight like a chess club member. Like, that was kind of unfair. I didn't like that. I didn't like that qualifier. So we'll refer to them as the non-sports extracurricular, and I'll probably be a little redundant.
I like clubs and activities better.
What's that?
I like clubs and activities.
Clubs and
I like
activities,
that.
that's the
I like that
language we
much better.
use through
Thank
the,
you.
but
I
yeah,
don't
that's the
like
language that we use through, but the qualifier for us was kind of important because the preliminary work done last summer and early fall in anticipation of an in-person return to this world included, you know, the clubs and the activities as well as the athletics, but as Superintendent Caverly suggested, once we got the new permissions, the logistics for the athletic element of it fell a little bit more easily, so we wanted to vet all the other clubs and activities one more time before we get up and running. And as I said, I'll be a little redundant on a couple themes. One of them, that idea of the onion has a lot of layers, so once we got into it, and the other is we were taking it from a view of the MPA essentially opened a door for us to do this, and it excited us, but we wanted to kind of walk before we ran, because the culture that we had established this year with the clubs and activities, when we thought there was only going to be a remote option, a lot of people put a lot of hours into creating a remote experience for something that wasn't going to happen otherwise. Now we had to reverse that and kind of undo some of the planning, if that makes sense. So undo some of the planning. Good news, we can go in person. You just spent 3 months to build the virtual great experience now we have. So that's, the devil's in the details, and that's where we are right now. So in essence, we, using the same framework, we're looking at it through creating an in-person after-school activity that's an extension of how we created safe on-site learning. So smaller groups, social distancing, masks, and sanitation. They fall into a couple categories. You can imagine the music or instrumental and performing arts, and then clubs that might just need a space. So we have about 15 clubs right now that are operational based on groups that wanted to meet even remotely. So we know they're an audience that's ready to start exploring what would it look like in person. So we're going to start there. And then we'll start folding in some clubs that had been maybe dormant are now seeing this as an opportunity. And so it's an agile plan. So in essence, really, as I said, we'll be ready likely by this Friday to kind of make public our equivalent of the athletic playbook. So the club and activity playbook. As I said, right now it contains 15 clubs, and then it will have the general guidance, and then we'll have guidance for each specific club. For example, we're going to finalize tomorrow music and the guidance in the instrumental jazz band, for example. The location, the schedule, the time. So this is the onion coming to greet us. The times students can play isn't clearly defined, so we'll have to determine that time, and the air exchange that has to happen in that dedicated space after students have played a half an hour. Can that space no longer be used? And so do we use the music room and then the auditorium, because a second group comes in, because if there's 30 kids, we have to cohort smaller groups. So when I say the devil's in the details, that's what we've been working on the last week or so to get up and operational. So as I said, the spirit of we're going to grow these experiences much like we have on-site learning with cohorts, size, sanitation, et.cetera. We want to open it up to as many clubs and groups as possible. Right now there's 15 that are already operational. And the two kind of categories they fall into are, as I said, like performing arts and music, where they have special considerations, and then a collection of groups that, as Superintendent Caverly alluded to, they just need a dedicated space, and then we have to have a schedule, and then make sure the extra sanitation and the extra cleaning is there. Because one thing that will be different is when we're operating normally, that's sometimes a fluid determination. Hey, when should we meet next week? Thursday at 6. Can everyone make it? Raise your hand, and Thursday at 6 is a meeting. We won't have that flexibility this year. So we want to get people on site and in person, but there'll still be some, make sure you have a seating chart for the group that came, and have essentially a roster for that group. And groups that are larger, will they be going a Tuesday meeting and a Thursday meeting? So as I said, the devil's in the details, but we're really close. We sent out a letter, I think it went out tonight, just to give an update on where we are. And as I said, it's an agile plan, because what will come behind it are some of the groups that hadn't been meeting might want to start. And then in that case, they'll go in one of those two categories, likely the club activity that needs a room, and then we'll find a space for them.
Rob, one of the, I think, to give you an example of a problem that we've never had before, but we've got to determine is that we do have some staff members who have medical conditions where they aren't necessarily in school every day. And so what is the overriding issue? So if let's say I'm the chess club advisor. If I am not in school, but the chess club still wants to meet, like what dictates how the chess club works? Is it the advisor or is it the student need? And so we're really having to navigate that. Like that's the first time we've ever had to really think about that because we've always kind of taken for granted that this is what you do and this is how you do it. At the same time, we have some language in our contract that says if you're not going to return for a stipend position, we need to let you know by May 15th. And so there's some really interesting conversations that we have to kind of work our way through right now. And so that is just kind of just a simple example of just how, again, 2 weeks ago, a simple decision to say this is what we're going to do. This unfolds as to you start playing things out and what does it look like, and so just to kind of reiterate Rob's point, we're trying to be careful. And again, there are many people who think, why the heck are you even doing this? So we've got to try to find a way to be in the middle to do things safely and really have the focus on being the extension of the school day. And if our environment changes, that will be something that we'll have to look at. And so next week, I think we need to really, as a board, I will put to you kind of our next step when it comes to athletics, because I do believe, that there is a push out there for that next step. And so Rich and I will be gathering some data, and that next step is going to be, do we allow teams to compete? And so that's a whole nother question, and I'll share more data with you next week when we meet on Wednesday, but just so you kind of can see what's kind of coming down the road. Certainly, I will certainly give a recommendation. I mean, that's ultimately that vote's up to you. So, any questions for Rob or for Rich?
Yeah, I have just one question. Hi, this is Heather. I just want to make sure that we're considering availability to all students. So whether they're remote, full-time remote, or doing maybe the hybrid option. You had mentioned it earlier. There's some kids that may not be able to get transportation to school to participate in these activities. So I would encourage us to really consider providing remote opportunities for the children.
Absolutely. And it's interesting, Heather, that you mentioned that. I was speaking to one of the coaches and just speaking for what's already happening. But when we went through, I believe of the 12 kids that were out there, only 3 of the kids involved were in-person students. So there were students who were remote, who were coming in for practice, and then leaving. And so just very interesting, because I just didn't, that was a phenomenon that I hadn't expected. And so that's a different situation than people who can't be out. And that's where the remote piece of making sure those offerings are there. But it is an interesting dynamic that kind of has come out of this that I don't think any of us necessarily expected. So.
And just to be clear, meaning in-person doesn't dismiss the remote experience. Is that what you mean? The remote students who still need a remote club experience.
Right. So if you are going to offer a face-to-face option, then providing that option remotely as well, perhaps may be something we want to consider, or provide a different type of activity remotely, so that those kids that are 100% remote can participate in something. I think that's going to be really important for the mental health and well-being of our students.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah, and as I said, that essentially is another one of those layers of the onion relative to now a club advisor excited, or even, as Superintendent Cavalier alluded to, maybe with a little trepidation, has this in-person option. They're also maintaining a remote environment, so how, and balancing those two. So absolutely not dismissing it, but again, just another one of those, the devil's in the details, where we're really excited about the permissions, and then when we vetted what it actually looks like, we want to make sure all the bases are covered, back to the cliche, walk before we run, etc. So,
I do want to share, Heather sent me an email, and I thought it was an excellent point, is that our use of technology, like our websites for this information, we've got to do a better job of that. So one of the things that I'm excited about is Aptigee should be kicking off the Monday after Thanksgiving. And so the websites will look remarkably different for ease of use, and then creating a plan to be able to, how do we make sure that that website is constantly monitored to make sure the information is correct. And I kind of go back to, my second year of being an administrator. I thought that if I had a board where I could post everything, it was going to solve all my problems, right? And then the principal pulled me aside and said, John, I will get the board for you, but you got to understand, if I get it for you, the trick is you've got to stay up on top of it. And so, if you have old information, that's worse than not having any information as far as I'm concerned. So we've got to make sure that we stay on top of that. So this new platform, the ease of use will be much more, but that's a push that we're going to certainly make sure that we're emphasizing as we kind of transition to this new platform, which is going to take a little time to get up and going, but it's much easier. And so I think parents will enjoy it more, but in also trying to find a way to get, I think the word I used with Rich Luciano is that we're trying to get good news ambassadors from every building so that we can try to get stories and things posted on a weekly basis, just to say, hey, look, this is what's happening. Because I think one of the things that we don't do a real good job on is celebrating the things that we do that are really good. And I think we need to do a better job of that. So anyway, thank you.
Just a quick, Mr. Caverly from our fact checker, Ryan, I think it's after February break.
Yeah.
That'll be up and running.
You did say after Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
I must have been hungry. Sorry.
Yeah, I heard both, so I think you're right.
Yeah, maybe it's November. I don't even know. It's been a long couple of months. So, yeah.
Can I
Okay.
just ask one more question? Is there any consideration, instead of just sticking with the clubs that have been, is there any consideration to offering a new club given this, the situation? So could there be a snowshoeing, something that's outside, something that could happen here, winter hiking, or?
Yeah, yes, absolutely,
Okay.
and it probably will be two, some that aren't imagined yet, and some that, when we did our first sweep in the fall about what clubs can present a good remote experience.
Mhm.
Right, yeah, so as I said, the walk before we run, we have 15 that are up and running operational, that have rosters or are ready to go. And then who's the next layer? And at that point, we think what we have established is that those two categories, and we'd have the template, and it'd be as easy, well, or jinx us. It would be finding the location, putting them on the schedule, here's what you follow. As I said, I think the performing arts and music are a little bit of a standalone. They have some other rules that we have to play by and really wade through those, because I think, as John alluded to, the languages, and that has a residual effect on what could happen actually in the classroom.
We've got to be careful. One little tidbit of that is that we are much more flexible at our elementary schools and our middle schools. And so if you go through the contract, you'll notice where it says, Marshall Middle School has 50 intramural points. And so intramural points, when we negotiated the contract 3 years ago, what we said is that we wanted some flexibility, that if kids had interest, so if they said, hey, look, let's do snowshoeing, Jerry always used the Pokemon Club kind of example, so that we have the flexibility that we can tailor those intramural points to kind of what students want to do. So that's very easy to do at the elementary school. At the high school, they have 10 basically undesignated points, which are called new opportunity points. And that's the pool of points that Rob would have to be able to do that. Now, that being said, if we're not going to run something, we would have to meet and confer with the union and say, this is what we were going to do in light of the pandemic. And I want to be clear that they've been really good about it, but there is, so it's much easier at the middle school than it would be at the high school. There would be some extra steps that we would have to take. But snowshoeing was the exact example that I used today, actually. So, that's something that we could do outside, pretty simple. We have the stuff. I think we've, go to Elliott Elementary School, I think they've got 45 pairs of snowshoes just sitting there right now. So, absolutely. But I just want to be clear, just from a contractual standpoint, there is a little bit of a difference.
So does each club or activity carry 1 point value, or is it like 2 based upon the level of involvement?
Yeah, so within the murals, and I'm going to be slightly off, but it's basically, if we were to say each point is valued at $190 roughly, and so we say if you meet X number of times, I think it's 5 times plus the planning and stuff, that would be a point, and so you kind of plan accordingly. But there are other stipends, and so where the non-athletic came from was that about 15 years ago, when we created kind of the rubric that's used to determine what groups get paid, and so when we did the district musical, we said, okay, let's go through and create a rubric to say, based on numbers, time, and all these different factors, non-athletic was the term that was used. And so I think when people look at that rubric, that's where that term came from. which I don't care for, but that's where it came from. But that's part of it. So you might get 12 points, or the civil rights team, you get 8 points for a stipend. And so that points came from us going through a rubric to say this number of kids, this much time, this much level of supervision, and so like that's where that was created from. Whereas intramurals is kind of more on the usage based. And the other thing that we had always, I wouldn't say always, had been kind of a trademark of the board was that like when a new opportunity kind of started, the idea behind that was, hey, look, if you want to try something new, let's try it and see if it grows. And after 3 years of running it, the board might say, hey, wait a second, this is something that's really gone over very well. Could we, create some money that this becomes a full-time opportunity? And so the high school has many more kind of locked-in dollars, points, than the other schools, but that's where those numbers come from.
Okay.
That's a long answer to a short question, I'm
Okay.
sorry.
No, makes sense.
Yep. Any other questions?
I think so. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And that is the end of my report. I turn it over to the students.
Okay, so the spring musical is going to be online this year. It's directed and organized by Miss West, and students can help in any part of the musical, from acting to video editing, which is a new role which is really unique to this year, so that's kind of an exciting part of it. And College Board recently announced that the AP exams are going to be in person and full length, which is the full 3 hours with multiple choice and free response. Last year there were only 45 minutes and there were just 2 free response questions. So I feel like in a lot of students' opinions that wasn't very reflective of their learning. So this is kind of a good change, I think. And they're also not open note this year. And it's also important to note that this is all subject to change, so we'll see where we are at the end of the year. Interact Club started signups for their 2022 global service trip in the Dominican Republic, where they'll be helping with environmental conservation and education issues, and they're going to be working directly with local community members. Okay, Trevor.
So to kind of build on to Mr. Basel, so the environment in all sports, they're all ecstatic. Every day we have coaches and captains speaking out about how don't take it for granted that we're practicing. This play it's your last practice. And it's showing throughout the practice because you have kids giving it all out and just happy to be together. And then the other thing I said was, so last week I brought up the junior fundraiser. And so the whole donating stage is passed and we're now on to bidding. Hopefully you got an email about that. And then so I looked at the website yesterday and it said we've raised over $3,000. And that's just on the first day of 2 weeks to come.
Wow.
That's great.
And that's it.
Very cool.
Thank you very much, folks. That concludes my report.
Thank you. That brings us to correspondence. We have none to report on. Report of the committees. The FNF committee will next meet just before our next board meeting, which is a week from today because of the February break. And the Ed Policy Committee did meet on the 27th of January. And Jen, I think you were going to
Yep.
tell us some things about that?
Yep. So tonight we have 8 first readings that came from that meeting. The first is EBCA, which is the Comprehensive Emergency Management Plan. And we decided to go with the MSMA recommendations that changed just a little bit of the language there. And then the second is JRA, which is Student Education Records and Information. We decided to go with the Drummond Woodsum policy there, as it broke things down a little bit more. And also we'll be looking further into the SRO policy, which we touched on last time, I believe. The third is JRA-R. And let's see, were we going to go with the Drummond Woodsum policy there, how to handle, when a student turns 18. Yes, we're going to go with the Drummond Woodsum recommendation on that one as well. The fourth, JRA-E1. There's 4 segments to the JRA here. Drummond Woodsum has a more detailed policy than the district's current policy, so we're going to use that one. JRA-E2 was reviewed and there was no changes, just updating our records that was reviewed. JRA-E3, let's see, update some of the language. What else? I have something about passive consent here. Do you remember the details of that? Heather, do you remember?
Not offhand, I don't.
Staying with the district policy. Yes.
E3?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep, E3.
Yep.
Yep, staying with the district policy.
And I think it really clarifies what information we're going to share much more succinctly. So that it's if you don't want us to do this, you need to let us know, as opposed to if we're going to do this, we need to tell you.
Permission,
You'll
yes.
get your permission. So.
Yep. And then number 7, JILD, we were going to go with the MSMA sample policy, which was a cross-reference policy. And then I'll just go to number 8 here for the sake of continuity. ILA, we were going to go with the MSMA recommendation as well. And we also discussed policy IKF, which is not up for a reading tonight, but there was just some discussion that talks about graduation participation for students with IEPs. And we're going to, Scott is looking more into that and with regards to language and clarifications and adding some new language there. So that will be revisited at another policy meeting. And that is it, unless anyone has anything to add.
That's excellent. No?
Okay,
Awesome.
thank you.
Thank you. That brings us into the new business, which is mostly the first readings of all of those policies you just discussed. May I have a motion, please, on EBCA?
Motion to approve the first reading and discussion of Policy Comprehensive Emergency Management Plan, EBCA.
I'll second. Jen?
Jen, thank you. This is a first reading. They'll be back next week, actually, right?
Yeah, correct.
Yes,
Yep.
good, okay. Any questions or comments?
It's a very brief change.
Okay, all in favor? I make that 6-0, thank you. May I have a motion, please, on JRA?
Move that we approve first reading and discussion of policies, student education records and information -JRA.
I'll second.
Lisa?
Lisa?
Thank you. Any questions about JRA or any observations? It's pretty straightforward, yes? Any comments? In that case, all in favor? Sorry, did I go too fast, or? Okay.
No.
6-0, good, awesome, thank you. Slow me down if I'm pushing you to a vote too fast, please. Okay, may I have a motion on JRA-R?
I move to approve the first reading and discussion of policy, student education records and information, administrative procedure, JRA-R.
I'll second
Second.
that. Oh, good.
I had 3 people second.
Move it along.
Matt, you win to this time. Okay. This is the procedure. Any questions? Comments? All right, looks good. All in favor, please. That is 6-0, thank you. May I have a motion, please, on JRA-E1?
I move we approve the first reading and discussion of policy, annual notice of student education records and information rights, JRA-E1.
I'll second. Lisa?
Thank you, Lisa. Questions or comments? Glad to see we're sticking with the 15 cents
Yeah.
per page.
Very important. That was
All right, all in favor, please. 6-0, thank you.
It's going to be a big revenue source.
A motion, please, on E2.
I move to approve the first reading and discussion of policy and denial of consent and release, student information, MHS-JRA-E2.
I'll second.
Jen,
Jen?
thank you. Questions or comments about E2? All in favor? That's 6-0, thank you. Moving right along. May I have a motion, please, on E3?
I move we approve the first reading and discussion of policy denial of consent to release student information, elementary and middle school, JRA-E3.
I'll second that.
Matt, thank you. This is just the form. Any questions or comments about that? All in favor? 6-0, thank you very much. Motion, please, on ILD.
I move we approve the first reading and discussion of policy educational research, student submission to surveys, analysis, or evaluations, ILD.
Second that, Heather?
Thank you, Heather. Questions about ILD? Seemed pretty straightforward to me. All in favor? That is 6-0, thank you. And lastly, ILA.
I move we approve the first reading and discussion of policy student assessment, ILA.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Matt. Questions about ILA?
Most of this is crossed off? Is that? Wow. Well, that summarizes it pretty well. 2 paragraphs.
So the thought process, just for clarity, was that the assessment system in the state is changing so rapidly right now. So the more simple the policy right now, there's a new assessment system coming now, and then we're not sure if that's going to be a 1-year, 2-year, 3-year, 5-year change. So just to leave it as broad as possible, then we'll adjust it once we have more information from the state. That is the thought process.
Okay.
Any other questions? All in favor? That is 6-0, thank you.
It's not often we take words away. We're usually adding more.
Yeah,
Yes.
I know.
Yes.
This was a nice
Well,
change.
keeps it clear and simple and flexible.
Thank you, everyone who gave presentations tonight. That was quite awesome. I don't want to put anybody else on the spot for further time here unless there's anything else burning. Otherwise, I'll accept a motion, please, to enter into executive session.
I'll move that we enter into an executive session for the purpose of discussing the superintendent's labor contract negotiations pursuant to Title I MRSA and 4056D, and consultation between school unit and its attorney, Title I MRSA and 4056E.
I'll second. Lisa?
Lisa, thank you. All in favor? That is 6-0, thank you very much. We will move into executive session
And that's at 8:04.
after a, thank you, I was just going to check that,
Yep.
8:04.
Yep.